The smoke burned her lungs before the heat reached her skin. Seren Valewood pressed her palm harder against the wound in her mother's side, feeling the warm pulse of blood between her fingers slow with each labored breath. Around them, the cottage walls groaned, flames licking up the ancient timber her grandmother had blessed 3 generations ago. The protection spells woven into the wood meant nothing now, not against the torches her brother's men had thrown through the windows. "You have to go." Her mother's voice came out thin, rattling. "Seren, listen to me. I'm not leaving you." The words scraped past the knot in her throat. Her free hand moved to her swollen belly, where her baby kicked against her palm as if sensing the chaos, the danger, the death seeping into every corner of their home. 6 months along, and she'd never felt more vulnerable, more terrified, more utterly alone. Her mate was already dead. 3 weeks buried in the cold ground, taken by the same treachery that now consumed everything she'd ever known. "You stubborn, beautiful girl." Her mother's blood-stained fingers found her cheek, leaving streaks of warmth across her skin. "Just like your father. He never listened either." A beam crashed behind them, sending sparks showering across the floor. Seren flinched, curling her body protectively around her mother's failing form, around the life growing inside her. The heat pressed closer, hungry, and somewhere outside she could hear shouting, her brother's men searching through the smoke, making sure no one escaped. Orion did this. The thought burned hotter than the flames. Her own brother, the boy she'd played with in these very rooms, who'd promised at their father's grave to always protect her. He'd sent assassins for her mate, and when that hadn't broken her claim to the family lands, he'd come to finish what he'd started. The seal. Her mother's hand moved weakly to her bodice, fumbling at the laces. "Take it. You must—" A coughing fit seized her, flecks of red appearing on her lips. "Mother, please, save your strength." "There is no strength left to save." Those words, spoken with such quiet certainty, shattered something in Seren's chest. Her wolf, dormant and grief-dulled since Marcus's death, whined somewhere deep inside her. Not stirring, not rising, just mourning. Always mourning. Her mother's trembling fingers finally found what they sought. She pressed something cool and metallic into Seren's bloody palm, a seal, old beyond memory, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the firelight. "This belonged to your grandmother's grandmother, the Alpha King's bloodline." Her mother's eyes, growing distant, focused one last time. "You must take the baby to him. Claim the protection owed to our family. He will not refuse, cannot refuse, when he sees this seal." "The Alpha King?" Seren stared at the worn metal in her hand. She knew the stories. Everyone did. Zephyr Thornwood, ruler of the 5 territories, a king so powerful and ruthless that even rogue alphas bent their necks at his name. "Mother, I can't just... Promise me." Her mother's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Swear it on your father's memory, on Marcus's soul, on the child you carry. You will go to the Alpha King and you will claim what is rightfully yours." The roof groaned above them. Seren could feel the floor heating beneath her knees, knew they had minutes at most before the entire structure collapsed. Her mother was dying, was already dying, and there was nothing she could do, no healer close enough, no power in her blood strong enough to stop it. "I swear it," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "I promise, Mother. I'll keep the baby safe. I'll go to the Alpha King." "Good girl, my brave girl." Her mother's hand fell away from her cheek, and for a moment peace smoothed the lines of pain from her face. "Your father is waiting for me. I can see him, Seren. He's smiling." "No, not yet, please." But her mother's eyes had already gone still, fixed on something Seren couldn't see, some distant light beyond the flames that devoured their world. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the house down around them, to find her brother and rip his throat out with her bare hands. But her baby kicked again, a sharp reminder that she wasn't alone in her body, that her choices now meant life or death for 2. "Get up," she told herself. "Move." The seal clutched in her bloody fist. Seren pressed a kiss to her mother's cooling forehead. "I'll make him pay," she promised. "I'll make him pay for all of it." Then she ran. The night swallowed her. She fled through the back garden, through the hidden gate her mother had shown her when she was a child, stumbling over roots and stones as the glow of the burning cottage lit her path from behind. Her lungs screamed with each breath, her belly heavy and awkward as she pushed through the dense forest. Behind her, she could hear them searching. Her brother's voice carried through the smoke, sharp with false concern. "Find her. She's confused, grieving. We need to bring her home safely." Home. As if he hadn't just murdered their mother. As if he hadn't ordered Marcus's death, staged to look like a rogue attack. As if he hadn't spent months poisoning their territory against her, whispering that a pregnant widow couldn't hold lands, couldn't lead, couldn't be trusted with the family legacy. Seren pressed on, one hand braced beneath her belly, the other clutching the seal so tightly the carved edges bit into her palm. The pain kept her focused, kept her moving when exhaustion threatened to drag her down. The Alpha King, claim the protection owed to our family. She didn't know what that meant. Not really. Her mother had never spoken of connections to the royal bloodline, never mentioned debts or promises that stretched back generations. But the seal was old and real and heavy in her hand, and her mother had died to give it to her. She would honor that death. The forest stretched endless before her, and Seren walked into it, leaving smoke and blood and everything she'd known behind. 3 weeks later, she stood before the palace gates. The journey had stripped her down to bone and will. Her dress hung loose on her frame, the rich purple wool stained with mud and harder things. Her shoes had worn through 5 days ago. She'd wrapped her feet in rags and kept walking. The baby had grown heavier with each passing mile, pressing against her spine until every step sent shooting pain through her hips. But she was here. She was here. And she was still alive. And somewhere behind those massive iron gates was the Alpha King who would protect her child, or explain why her mother had believed he would. The guards stared at her with barely concealed contempt. A pregnant woman, filthy and wild-eyed, demanding an audience with their king. She knew how she looked. She didn't care. "The seal," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Show him the seal. He'll see me." One guard laughed. The other's hand moved to his sword. "Move along, rogue. The king doesn't entertain beggars." Seren held up the seal, the metal catching the morning light, and watched their faces change. The laughing stopped. Minutes later, she was being escorted through corridors of polished stone, past tapestries older than her bloodline, toward the private study where the Alpha King waited. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her wolf, silent for so long, pressed forward with sudden desperate alertness. The door opened. A man stood with his back to her, broad shoulders bent over war maps spread across an ancient desk. His scent hit her first, pine and wood smoke and something darker, something that made heat bloom unexpectedly in her chest. Then he turned, and Seren's world cracked open. His eyes found hers, and the world stopped breathing. Seren had expected coldness. She'd prepared herself for the ruthless king of legend, the Alpha whose name made grown wolves tremble, whose justice was swift and absolute. She'd steeled herself for dismissal, for cruelty, for the work of convincing a powerful stranger that her mother's dying words meant something. She hadn't prepared for this. Warmth flooded her chest so suddenly she gasped, spreading through her veins like honey heated over flame. Her wolf who had been silent and grieving since they'd lowered Marcus into the cold ground, who had barely stirred even as their cottage burned, surged against her skin with desperate, impossible recognition. The sensation was so overwhelming that Seren staggered, her hand flying to her chest as if she could press the feeling back down, contain it, deny it. No, this can't be. Across the room, Zephyr Thornwood went rigid. His sharp intake of breath filled the silence between them, and gold bled into his irises, swallowing the dark gray until his eyes burned with a light that wasn't entirely human. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening but claiming, the sound of a predator recognizing something that belonged to him. "You," he breathed. Seren couldn't move, couldn't think. Her mind screamed at her that this was wrong, that she had been mated already, that Marcus's claim should have been the only claim her wolf would ever recognize. But her body told a different story, her skin prickling with awareness wherever his gaze touched, her breath coming faster, the bond sense she thought had died with her mate roaring back to life with terrifying intensity. He crossed to her in 3 strides, and she should have retreated, should have remembered the helpless, hunted creature she'd become. Instead, she stood frozen as the Alpha King stopped inches from her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the rapid pulse beating at his throat. "You carry another's child." His voice came out rough, strained, as if the words cost him something. His nostrils flared, reading her scent, and something dark and possessive flickered across his features before he controlled it. "Yet your wolf calls to mine." "That's not—" Seren's voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his burning golden gaze, even as every instinct urged her to bare her throat, to submit, to let him claim what the bond insisted was his. "That's not possible. I was mated. My mate is dead. The bond should be silent." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to flinch away, but she couldn't seem to move. His fingers stopped a breath from her cheek, hovering there, and even without contact, she could feel him like static electricity against her skin. "Should be broken. Should be grieving." His jaw tightened. "Yet here you stand in my study, and my wolf is trying to tear out of my chest to reach you." The admission seemed to cost him. Seren watched something vulnerable flash across his features before the mask of the ruthless king slammed back into place. But she'd seen it. She'd seen the crack in his armor, the proof that whatever impossible thing was happening between them, it wasn't one-sided. "The seal," she managed, holding it up between them like a talisman, a reminder of why she'd come. "My mother. I know what the seal means." His hand finally dropped, and he took a deliberate step back, putting distance between them. The loss of his proximity left her feeling cold in a way that made no sense, that she resented with every fiber of her being. "Your grandmother's grandmother saved my grandfather's life during the border wars." He swore a blood debt to her line, protection, for as long as that seal exists. His eyes dropped to her swollen belly, and something complicated moved across his face. "You've come to claim that debt. For my child." Seren forced strength into her voice she didn't feel. "My brother murdered my mate. He burned our cottage with my mother inside. He wants our family lands, and he won't stop until everyone with a claim is dead." The growl that rumbled from Zephyr's chest this time was pure predator, all threat and promise. "Someone threatens what is mine." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "What is under my protection?" he corrected, but the slip hung between them, damning and undeniable. Seren's wolf pressed forward at his words, at the possessiveness he couldn't quite hide. "Ours," her wolf insisted, ignoring every rational argument. "He is ours." "He is not," Seren told herself firmly. "He is the Alpha King. I am a pregnant widow fleeing for my life. This changes nothing." But even as she thought it, she knew it changed everything. Night had fallen by the time Zephyr led her through the winding corridors of the palace. He hadn't touched her, had been almost painfully careful not to touch her, but he'd refused to let anyone else escort her to her chambers. The servants they passed dropped their eyes and bent their necks, acknowledging their king, but Seren caught their curious glances, their whispered speculation about the filthy, pregnant stranger their Alpha King treated with such careful attention. "These rooms connect to mine through that door." Zephyr stopped at a threshold carved with protective runes, gesturing to a heavy oak panel set into the far wall. "The lock is on your side. No one enters without your permission." He paused, and something in his face softened almost imperceptibly. "Including me." The words hung in the air between them. Seren stared at him, exhaustion and confusion and that impossible warmth warring in her chest. She'd expected to be given servants' quarters, if she was given anything at all. She'd expected to fight for every scrap of consideration, to prove herself worthy of the protection her mother had promised was owed. She hadn't expected the Alpha King of the 5 territories to stand at her threshold like a supplicant, promising not to enter without invitation. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You could... She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. His power, her vulnerability, the bond that pulled between them like a physical chain. No one would stop you. Something dark moved through his golden eyes. No one would stop me, he agreed quietly. That's precisely why I won't. Seren's breath caught. She was suddenly acutely aware of how he was looking at her, not at the dirt on her skin or the ruin of her dress, not at her swollen belly or the exhaustion shadowing her face. He was looking at her, seeing something beneath the surface, treating her like a person with choices rather than a problem to be managed. You need rest. His voice had gone rough again, strained with something she was beginning to recognize as control. There will be food sent and a healer to check on. His eyes dropped to her belly and his jaw tightened. On the child. Tomorrow we'll discuss your brother and what justice looks like. Justice. The word sent a shiver through her, equal parts hope and fear. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. For believing me. For not. You came to me bloody and desperate and 6 months along with another male's child. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white with the effort of keeping himself still. You smell like grief and exhaustion and fire and fear, and underneath all of it... He stopped, shaking his head. Lock the door, Seren. For both our sakes. The sound of her name in his voice sent warmth flooding through her veins. She stepped back, over the threshold, and reached for the heavy iron lock. The last thing she saw before the door closed between them was the gold fading from his eyes, replaced by something softer. Something that looked almost like wonder. She slid the lock into place. On the other side of the door, she heard him exhale slowly, heard his footsteps retreat toward his own chambers. Only when silence settled did she let herself sink to the floor, her back against the wood, her hand pressed to her racing heart. What is happening to me? Her wolf settled in her chest, warm and present in a way she hadn't been since Marcus died. Mate? Her wolf insisted simply. He is mate. He can't be, Seren argued. Marcus was mate. Marcus is dead. You can't have 2 mates. But even as she thought it, she remembered her mother's words about the seal, about bloodlines and debts and protection owed. Her mother had known something, had sent her here for reasons beyond simple sanctuary. What hadn't she said? The question circled in Serene's mind as exhaustion finally dragged her down. She curled on the thick rug before the hearth, too tired to make it to the bed, one hand cradling her belly where the baby kicked restlessly. For the first time since the fire, she slept without dreaming of smoke. The great hall fell silent when Zephyr Thornwood rose from his throne. Seren stood at the edge of the assembly, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame, dark green wool that someone had clearly chosen with care, soft enough not to irritate her skin, sized to accommodate her belly. She hadn't asked where they'd come from. She was beginning to suspect she knew. The court had been in session when the Alpha King's steward announced her presence, and the nobles assembled hadn't bothered to hide their stares. She heard the whispers rippling through the crowd like poison. Who is she? Some stray he's taken in? Look at her belly, carrying another male's pup already. Damaged goods, one woman murmured, not quite quietly enough. Another male's breeding, and he brings her before the court like she matters? Heat flooded Seren's face. Her wolf snarled inside her chest, urging her to confront, to fight, but she held herself still. She was an outsider here, unknown and unproven. She had no standing to challenge anyone. Lord Creswell. Zephyr's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. You have something to say? The man who stepped forward was middle-aged and soft, the kind of noble who had never known true hardship. He bowed slightly, not low enough for genuine respect. Only curiosity, my king. We're all surprised by your attention to this woman. Surely there are more appropriate accommodations for refugees than the chambers adjoining your own. She is not a refugee. The words came out cold enough to frost the air. She is Seren Valewood, of the bloodline that saved my grandfather's life. Her family holds a blood debt from the crown that has not been called in for 4 generations. She came to claim it. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Creswell's face went pale, then red. Additionally, Zephyr continued, she carries the heir of Marcus Valewood, a loyal ally of this court who was murdered by assassins 3 weeks past. His gaze swept the room, gold flickering at the edges of his irises. Her brother Orion Darkhollow orchestrated that murder. He burned her family cottage with her mother inside. He hunts her still. The whispers changed tone, shifting from contempt to something else. Not quite sympathy, but calculation. Political awareness. The nobles were reassessing, reconsidering what this stranger's presence might mean. She stands under my protection. Zephyr's voice dropped lower, dangerous. She is an honored guest of this court, not a supplicant. Question her worth again, and you question your own place in my court. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Serene stared at the Alpha King, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. He hadn't looked at her once during his speech, had kept his burning golden gaze fixed on the nobles, on the threats, on anyone who might dare to challenge her presence. But she felt his attention on her like a physical weight, like warmth spreading through the bond that shouldn't exist between them. He hadn't just defended her. He'd claimed her, publicly, irrevocably, in front of the entire court. Now, Zephyr's voice returned to its normal register, the deadly edge sheathed but not gone. If there is any further discussion about the placement or treatment of my honored guest, I invite you to bring it directly to me. He paused, and something like a smile curved his lips, though it held no warmth. In private, no one spoke. The session ended shortly after, nobles scattering like leaves before a storm. Seren stood rooted to her spot until the hall was nearly empty, until only the guards at the doors remained, until Zephyr descended from the throne and walked toward her with slow, measured steps. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes. He stopped before her, close enough that his pine and wood smoke scent wrapped around her senses. I did. They'll talk. They'll wonder why the Alpha King is so invested in a pregnant widow with nothing to offer. Let them wonder. His voice dropped to something softer, something meant only for her. Let them see exactly how I treat those under my protection. Let them understand that challenging you means challenging me. His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching, never touching. You are not nothing, Seren. You carry a child of prophecy under a seal of blood debt in the court of an Alpha King who— He stopped, jaw clenching. Who what? She whispered. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, who will burn the world down before he lets anyone harm you? The admission settled into her chest like an ember, warming places she'd thought frozen forever. She shouldn't want this. Shouldn't want him. This terrifying, powerful stranger who made her feel things she'd thought she'd buried with Marcus. But her wolf pressed forward, demanding she close the distance between them, demanding she accept what the bond offered. She didn't close the distance, but she didn't retreat either. It was, she realized, a beginning. 3 days passed in the strange limbo between safety and belonging. Seren learned the rhythms of the palace, the bells that marked morning assembly, the corridors that led to the kitchens where servants pretended not to stare at her swollen belly, the gardens where she could walk in fragile sunshine and pretend she was simply another noble widow awaiting her child's birth. She learned to navigate around the whispers that followed her like shadows, the sidelong glances that assessed and catalogued and judged. She also learned to navigate around Zephyr Thornwood, which proved far more difficult. He kept his distance, as promised. The door between their chambers remained locked from her side each night, and he never so much as suggested she open it. But he appeared at meals, seating her beside him at the high table where the entire court could witness his attention. He appeared in the gardens when she walked, falling into step beside her with questions about her health, her comfort, whether the child had moved that morning. He appeared in the library when she sought refuge among the books, settling into a chair across from her with correspondence that never seemed to hold his attention as thoroughly as she did. His gaze followed her everywhere, and everywhere his gaze touched, warmth bloomed in her chest like an ember refusing to die. On the fourth morning, she woke to voices in the corridor outside her chamber, raised voices, urgent and sharp. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby stir in response to her sudden tension, and reached for the robe draped across the foot of her bed. The door to her chamber flew open before she could reach it. A man stood in the doorway, tall and lean with dark hair and a face she knew as well as her own. His features were sharper than hers, his eyes the same storm gray she saw in mirrors, his mouth twisted in an expression of desperate relief. Seren. Orion Darkhollow strode toward her, arms outstretched. Thank the moon. I've been searching for weeks. She stumbled backward, her hips striking the edge of the bed frame. Her wolf, dormant for so long, snarled to sudden awareness, flooding her limbs with the urge to run, to flee, to survive. Don't touch me. The words scraped from her throat raw and ragged. Orion stopped, his expression morphing from relief to wounded confusion. Sister. What? I don't understand. I've been frantic, searching every territory, every border crossing. When I heard you'd come to the Alpha King's court, You killed her. Seren's voice shook, but she forced the words out. You killed Mother. You sent assassins for Marcus. You burned our home to the ground. What? Orion's face went pale, his hands dropping to his sides. Seren, no. No. You're confused. The trauma? Losing your mate so suddenly, and then Mother. He took another step forward, and she pressed herself against the bedpost. I'm here to bring you home. To care for you properly. You and the baby. You're not well, sister. Anyone can see you're not well. Guards filled the doorway behind him. Palace guards, she noted with desperate relief, not the unfamiliar warriors she glimpsed lingering in Orion's wake. And behind them, his presence like a thunderstorm rolling across the horizon, came Zephyr. Lord Darkhollow. The Alpha King's voice could have frozen the summer sun. You were instructed to wait in the Great Hall until I could receive you properly. Orion turned, and Seren watched the transformation with sick fascination. The wounded brother vanished. In his place stood a grieving nobleman, shoulders bowed with exhaustion, face lined with worry. Forgive me, Your Majesty. He dipped his head in a gesture that was almost, but not quite, respectful enough. When I learned my sister was here, after weeks of fear for her safety, I couldn't wait. I had to see her, to assure myself she was unharmed. She is under my protection. Zephyr's gaze flicked to Seren, assessing, cataloging her position pressed against the bedpost, the tremor in her hands, the way her whole body angled away from her brother. Gold flickered at the edges of his irises, a protection that extends to her comfort and privacy within her own chambers. Of course, of course. Orion spread his hands, all wounded innocence. I meant no intrusion, but surely you can understand. She's my sister, my only living family. And the reports I received were troubling. What reports? That she fled our family home after a fire. Orion's voice dropped, thick with false grief. A fire that claimed our mother's life. Some witnesses said they saw Seren leaving the cottage just before the flames broke out. The words hit Seren like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the bedpost, her vision swimming. That's a lie. You know it's a lie. You were there, Orion. You brought the men who... She's unwell. Orion interrupted smoothly, turning to face Zephyr with an expression of brotherly concern. She has been since Marcus died. The healers at home warned she might become unstable. The pregnancy, the grief. It's affecting her mind. I only want to bring her somewhere safe. somewhere she can receive proper care. Heat pulsed beneath Seren's skin. Not the warmth of the mate bond, but something older, something that had slept in her blood for generations. Her mother's dying words echoed in her memory. The fire in your veins, daughter. It's more than wolf. Don't let them bury it. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. I am not going anywhere with you. Orion's mask slipped, just for an instant, just long enough for her to see the cold calculation beneath. Then it smoothed over again and he sighed. You see, Your Majesty, she doesn't know what's best for her. The Seren I grew up with would never refuse family, never turn away from those who love her. The Seren you grew up with, Seren said, each word dropping like a stone. Didn't know her brother was capable of matricide. Silence crashed through the room. Orion's face went still, perfectly still, and in that stillness she saw confirmation of everything she already knew. You'll want to be careful with such accusations, sister. His voice was soft now, soft and deadly. Words have power in the Alpha King's court. Say the wrong ones, and you might find yourself facing consequences you can't escape. Zephyr moved then, not toward Orion, but toward Seren. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides, placing himself between her and her brother, his broad shoulders blocking her view of that familiar, terrible face. Lord Darkhollow. The Alpha King's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains. You will remove yourself from Lady Valewood's chambers. You will wait in the Great Hall as you were instructed. And you will speak to my guest with the respect her position demands, or you will leave my territory entirely. A pause. Then, of course, Your Majesty, I apologize for my emotional outburst. Family matters can be so difficult. Footsteps retreated. The door closed. Seren's legs gave out. Zephyr caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her with infinite gentleness despite their strength. She found herself pressed against his chest, his heartbeat steady against her cheek, his scent of pine and wood smoke filling her lungs with each shuddering breath. I have you. His voice rumbled through her, warm and low. I have you, Seren. He cannot touch you here. He killed her? The words broke from her in a sob she couldn't contain. He stood there and lied about it like it was nothing, like she was nothing. I know. Zephyr's arms tightened. I know what he is. I saw it the moment he walked into my hall. She looked up at him, tears blurring his features. He's going to turn the court against me. He's already started. He'll poison everything with his lies until no one believes. Then we give them the truth. Zephyr's thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away the moisture there. Every truth, every piece of evidence, every witness who saw what really happened that night. There are no witnesses. He made sure of it. Anyone who might have spoken for me died in the fire, or fled before the flames caught. The baby kicked, hard, and Seren gasped. Zephyr's gaze dropped to her belly, something fierce and protective flashing across his features. Then we find other evidence. His hand hovered over the swell of her pregnancy, not quite touching. May I? She didn't know why she nodded, didn't know why she took his hand and pressed it to her belly, to the place where the child moved restlessly beneath her skin. But when his palm settled there, warm and broad and impossibly gentle, something in her chest loosened. A wall she hadn't known she'd built began to crumble. Your heir, she whispered. Marcus's child. Orion will never let this baby live if he can help it. Every claim I might have to our family's lands passes to this child. He needs me dead and the baby either dead or under his control. Neither will happen. Zephyr's eyes burned gold, but his touch remained gentle against her belly. I swear it on my father's grave, on the crown I wear, on every drop of blood in my veins. He will not have you. He will not have your child. Why? The question emerged before she could stop it. Why do you care so much? The blood debt, yes, but this is more than that. You look at me like... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't name what she saw in his eyes, because naming it would make it real, and she wasn't ready for real. She was 6 months pregnant with a dead man's child. She was a widow still wearing borrowed clothes in a court that whispered about her worth. She was broken and grieving and terrified, and this king who made her wolf sing should not be looking at her like she was something precious. Like what? His voice dropped to a murmur meant only for her. Like I matter. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted his hand from her belly and cupped her face instead, tilting it up so she had nowhere to look but at him. You are my mate. The words settled into her chest like truth. I don't expect you to accept that yet. I don't expect you to want it. Or me. Or any of this. But I will not pretend it isn't true. And I will not pretend that your safety isn't the most important thing in my world right now. A shiver traced down her spine. I was already mated. To Marcus. You can't just... It shouldn't be possible. And yet it is. His thumb traced her jaw, featherlight. The bond doesn't lie, Seren. Whatever came before, whatever you shared with Marcus, I would never diminish it. But what pulls between us now is real. I have felt the mate bond once before, when I was young and foolish, and lost her to a border skirmish before we could complete the claiming. Pain flickered across his features. There and gone. I know what it feels like. I know the difference between desire and destiny. Her breath caught. She hadn't known. She'd assumed. Everyone assumed the Alpha King was unmated by choice. Too powerful to share his throne, too dangerous to love. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was a long time ago. His hands dropped to his sides, giving her space she hadn't asked for but suddenly missed. The point is, I understand. Grief and new bonds, they don't mix easily. Take all the time you need. But know that when Orion threatens you, he threatens something I cannot let go unavenged. The baby kicked again, and Seren pressed her hand to the spot, feeling the small foot against her palm. He'll move carefully, she said. He's clever. He won't do anything obvious, not while the court is watching. He'll work in shadows, poison whispers, make everyone question whether I'm telling the truth. Then we stay ahead of him. Zephyr stepped back, his expression shifting from tenderness to calculation. He brought warriors with him, disguised as servants. I've had them watched since they entered my territory. Seren's blood chilled. How many? 12 that we've identified. Possibly more. That's enough to... Not in my palace. The Alpha King's voice held absolute certainty. Not against my guards. He may think he has the advantage, but he's playing a game he cannot win. Not here. Not against me. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But she'd believed she was safe before. She'd believed Marcus could protect her, that her family home was secure, that Orion's jealousy was mere sibling rivalry. She'd been wrong about all of it. He'll find a way. Her voice came out hollow. He always finds a way. Zephyr's gaze met hers, gold flickering in the gray depths. Then we find a way first, he said, together. The word settled into her like an anchor finding harbor. Together. She'd been alone since Marcus died, alone since her mother's last breath, alone in a way that had hollowed her out and left nothing but desperation in its place. But standing here, in borrowed clothes in a borrowed room with this impossible king who called her mate, she didn't feel quite so hollow anymore. She didn't feel safe either. Orion was here, in this very palace, wearing his mask of grieving brotherhood while he plotted her death. But she felt something she hadn't felt since the night Marcus's blood soaked into their bedroom floor. She felt like fighting. Together, she repeated, and watched something fierce and pleased kindle in Zephyr's eyes. The calm shattered 3 hours later. Seren had finally allowed herself to rest, curled on the settee in her chambers with a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in her hands, when the first scream split the air. She jerked upright, tea sloshing over her fingers, as more shouts followed. Not the controlled calls of guards, but raw, panicked cries that echoed through stone corridors. The door between her chamber and Zephyr's burst open. "Stay here." His command cut through the chaos, his eyes already burning gold as he strode toward the main door. "Lock both doors behind me. Do not open them for anyone but me." "Zephyr!" But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him, and Seren scrambled to throw the bolt with trembling fingers. The metal clicked into place just as another scream, closer now, made her blood run cold. The baby. Her hand flew to her belly where the child had gone still, as if sensing the danger pressing in from all sides. "We have to protect the baby." She backed away from the door, scanning the room for anything she could use as a weapon. The fireplace poker, a heavy candlestick, pathetic options against trained warriors, but better than nothing. The sounds of fighting grew louder. Steel against steel. Snarls that could only come from wolves in battle. And then, silence. Serene's heart hammered against her ribs. She strained to hear anything, any sign of who had won the skirmish in the corridor. But the quiet stretched unbearably long. A knock at the door. Gentle, almost polite. "Sister." Orion's voice slid through the wood like poison. "Open the door. I've come to take you home." Her wolf, dormant for so long, surged against her skin with a force that made her gasp, not in fear, in fury. Pure, incandescent rage that burned through every vein and set her nerve endings alight. "The king is occupied," Orion continued, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "A small distraction in the East Wing. Nothing serious. But it gives us time to talk, you and I. Family to family." Seren's fingers tightened around the poker. "I have nothing to say to you." "No? Not even about our dear mother? About how she begged at the end?" A soft laugh. "She called for you, you know. Screamed your name while the flames took her. I made sure to listen." Something cracked inside Seren's chest. Not breaking, but opening. "The fire in your veins," her mother had said. "It's more than Wolf." "I know what you did." Her voice came out steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I know you killed Marcus. I know you burned our home with Mother inside. I know you've been lying to everyone about me being unstable." "Proof?" Orion's voice dripped with false sympathy. "You have none. The court believes a grieving brother searching for his confused pregnant sister. They'll believe me when I tell them you attacked me, that I had no choice but to defend myself." The door shuddered as something heavy hit it. Then again. The wood groaned, ancient but not eternal. "Open the door, Seren. Make this easy. Sign over the family lands and I'll let you live. I might even let you keep the brat, as long as you raise it far from here, far from any claim to power." "You're lying." "Probably." Another impact. The bolt bent. "But you'll never know for certain, will you?" The door exploded inward. Orion stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his disguised warriors, blood spattered across his fine clothes. His eyes, their mother's eyes, gray and clear, held nothing but cold calculation as they swept over her. "There you are." He stepped into the room, and his wolves followed. "Running again, sister? You're so good at running." Seren raised the poker, pathetic, laughable, but she refused to cower, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Where is the king?" "Fighting fires in the East Wing, literally." Orion smiled, and it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. Her brother's face twisted into something monstrous. "My men set 3. By the time he realizes which one is a distraction and which one is real, we'll be long gone. You and me and your precious burden, off to settle family business." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "You don't have a choice?" He nodded to his warriors. "Take her. Gently, if possible. I need her able to sign documents." The first warrior lunged. Seren swung the poker with all her strength, catching him across the temple. He stumbled, cursing, and she swung again. But the second warrior was faster, grabbing her arm and wrenching the weapon away. Pain lanced through her shoulder as he twisted, forcing her to her knees. "Careful," Orion snapped. "Damage her too much and she can't write." "She fights like a wolf," The warrior growled, yanking her arms behind her back. She fights like our mother, stubborn to the end. Orion crouched before her, tilting her chin up with one finger. You could have made this easy, you know, accepted your place. Let me handle the family legacy as father always intended. But you had to run to the Alpha King, had to claim some ancient protection that should have been forgotten generations ago. Seren spat in his face. Orion recoiled, wiping his cheek with a look of pure disgust. Fine. We do this the hard way. He stood, nodding to his men. Bring her. If she resists again, break something non-essential. An arm should be sufficient. They hauled her upright, and her belly lurched, the baby shifting with distress. Seren's wolf howled inside her, pressing against her skin with desperate ferocity. But what could she do? She was human-formed, pregnant, outnumbered, outmatched. The fire in your veins. Her mother's voice, distant but clear. It's more than wolf. Don't let them bury it. Heat bloomed in Seren's chest. Not the warmth of the mate bond, not the familiar pulse of her wolf. Something older. Deeper. A flame that had slumbered in her bloodline for generations, waiting for someone desperate enough to wake it. Stop. Her voice came out strange, layered with harmonics that made the warrior's grips falter. I said stop. The air around her shimmered. Orion's eyes widened as the temperature in the room spiked, as the fireplace behind him roared to sudden, impossible life. What are you? You killed our mother. Serene's feet found the floor as the warriors released her, stumbling back from the heat radiating off her skin. You murdered my mate, you burned my home, and now you stand in the palace of my true mate and threaten my child. She raised her voice in a howl that shook the stone walls, that echoed through every corridor and chamber of the palace, that called every wolf within hearing to witness what came next. I, Seren Valewood, invoke the ancient law of blood challenge. The words poured from her lips like fire. I name Orion Darkhollow Kinslayer, Oathbreaker, murderer of his own blood. I demand trial before the court, and I demand justice. The power in her voice carried, amplified, impossible to ignore. She could feel wolves responding throughout the palace, guards abandoning their posts to answer the summoning, nobles rising from their chambers, the Alpha King himself turning from whatever distraction had claimed him. Orion's face twisted with fury. You think words can save you? You think calling witnesses matters when you'll be dead before they arrive? He drew a blade from his belt. Silver, she noted, meant for wolves who couldn't be killed any other way. I'm going to enjoy this, he snarled, lunging. But the door behind him crashed open, and Zephyr Thornwood filled the frame like a thunderstorm given form. His shirt was torn, soot streaked across his chest, and blood, some his, some not, painted his hands. But his eyes burned pure gold as they found Seren, found Orion, found the blade arcing toward her throat. He moved faster than any wolf she'd ever seen. One moment Orion's blade was descending. The next, Zephyr's hand had closed around her brother's wrist, bones grinding audibly beneath the pressure. The silver knife clattered to the floor. You dare! Zephyr's voice was barely recognizable, more growl than words. Touch what is mine. She's my sister. She is my mate. The Alpha King's free hand closed around Orion's throat, lifting him until his feet dangled above the floor. She carries a child under my protection. She has invoked blood challenge, and I have heard her claim. Guards flooded the room, followed by nobles in various states of undress, all drawn by Seren's summoning howl. They found their king holding a choking man aloft, and they found Seren standing in the center of the room with heat still shimmering off her skin like a mirage. The lady's words bind us all, one of the nobles said. Lord Creswell, she realized, the same man who'd questioned her worth days ago. His voice held wonder now, not contempt. Blood challenge cannot be refused. I don't refuse it. Orion's voice came out strangled, but defiant. I'll fight her champion. I'll prove she's lying, that she killed our mother and stole that seal. She doesn't need a champion. Seren stepped forward, and the gathered wolves parted before her. I invoke the protection granted to pregnant challengers under ancient law. Combat is delayed until I can fight myself, but the accused loses all political standing from the moment of challenge. She met her brother's eyes, watched the understanding dawn. You have no allies here anymore, Orion. No one will shelter you. No one will believe your lies. Your warriors will be questioned under truth compulsion, and your crimes will be exposed. You can't. I already have. Orion's composure cracked. The smooth, charming brother who'd convinced a court to doubt her. He vanished, replaced by the monster who'd burned their mother alive. You think you've won? He writhed in Zephyr's grip, reaching for the knife on the floor. You think any of this matters? I'll kill you. I'll kill your brat. I'll burn everything you love, just like I burned her. His fingers closed around the silver blade. Seren opened her mouth to warn Zephyr, but the Alpha King was already moving. He released Orion's throat and caught his wrist again, twisting the blade back toward its owner. Wait. Seren's voice cut through the chaos, and somehow, impossibly, everyone froze. Even Zephyr. She crossed to stand before her brother, close enough to see the madness flickering in his eyes. By blood law, I name you Kinslayer. Her voice carried to every corner of the room. Oathbreaker. Murderer of your own mother, who burned alive calling my name because you wanted land you were never fit to hold. Seren, you are nothing. She said it without hatred, without tears, just truth. You are not my brother. You are not my blood. You are nothing. Orion screamed, a wordless howl of fury and denial, and his hand spasmed on the blade. Zephyr moved. His claws, extended now, opened Orion's throat in a single clean strike. Blood sprayed across the stones as Seren's brother crumpled, his eyes wide with disbelief even as the light faded from them. Your sister's judgment stands, Zephyr said, his voice cold and final. Die knowing she defeated you. Orion's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he was gone. Seren stared at the body of the boy she'd once loved, the brother who'd become a monster, and felt nothing but hollow relief. It was over. Finally, impossibly, it was over. Zephyr's arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her away from the spreading pool of blood. It's done, he murmured against her hair. You're safe. You're both safe. She turned in his embrace and buried her face against his chest, breathing in pine and wood smoke and home. The baby kicked, strong and steady, and Seren let herself cry. The marking came 3 days later. They'd waited for the chaos to settle, for Orion's warriors to be questioned and imprisoned, for the evidence of his crimes to be presented to the court, for the nobles who doubted Seren to offer their shame-faced apologies. She'd accepted each one with grace she didn't feel, too exhausted and too relieved to hold grudges. But tonight, alone in Zephyr's chambers with the door locked and firelight painting gold across the walls, exhaustion gave way to something else entirely. You don't have to do this now. Zephyr stood by the window, his back to her, tension visible in every line of his body. You've been through trauma after trauma. The bond will wait. I've waited long enough. Seren crossed to him, placing her hand on his arm until he turned to face her. I've spent months surviving, running, losing everyone I loved. She cupped his face in her hands, marveling at the way his eyes fluttered closed at her touch. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live. I want this. I want you. Seren? Her name emerged from his lips like a prayer. If you knew how long I've imagined this, how many nights I've lain awake wanting, show me. He kissed her. It started gentle, questioning, a mate asking permission with every brush of his lips. But when she pressed closer, when her fingers tangled in his hair and a small sound of need escaped her throat, gentleness gave way to hunger. His hands mapped her body like he was memorizing her, careful around the swell of her belly, reverent as he traced the curve of her spine. She felt precious in his arms, cherished, claimed, even before his teeth touched her skin. Are you certain? His breath was hot against her neck, his lips hovering over the junction where shoulder met throat. Once I mark you, there's no undoing it. You'll be mine in a way that can never be broken. Yes. The word came without hesitation. Mark me, Zephyr. Make me yours. His teeth sank into her flesh. Pain bloomed first, sharp and bright, stealing her breath. But even as she gasped, the sensation transformed. Pleasure flooded through her veins like liquid gold, like sunlight after endless winter, like coming home to a place she'd never known she was missing. The mate bond, incomplete until this moment, roared to life between them. She felt him. Not just his presence, but his emotions. Fierce protectiveness, staggering love, an ache of loneliness finally being filled. She felt how beautiful she was through his eyes, how precious, how desperately wanted. His teeth withdrew, and his tongue laved over the mark, soothing the sting. Mine, he breathed against her skin. My mate, my Luna. But they weren't finished. Seren pulled back, cupping his face until he met her eyes. My turn. Understanding flickered across his features, followed by something raw and vulnerable. The Alpha King, who bowed to no one, tilted his head to bare his throat to her. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to the curve of his neck, feeling his pulse hammer beneath her mouth. Then she bit down. His groan vibrated through her as her teeth broke skin, as the bond completed in both directions. She tasted copper and power and mate, and the last hollow space inside her finally filled with light. Yours. The word escaped her as she withdrew, licking the wound closed. I'm yours, and you're mine, forever. Mate, Zephyr whispered, pulling her against his chest, both of them trembling with the force of what they'd forged. My mate. They held each other as the fire burned low, as the settled bond hummed between them like a second heartbeat. Seren felt the baby kick, felt Zephyr's hand settle over the movement, felt peace wash over her for the first time since before the fire took everything. This was home now. This man. This bond. This life growing inside her that would be raised with love, with protection, with a father who had chosen them both. No more running. Only this. Only them. The coronation came a month later. Seren stood in the great hall wearing silk the color of midnight, her mother's seal hanging beside Zephyr's crest on a chain around her neck. The nobles who had once whispered now bowed, their murmurs reverent as she passed. Luna, they called her, Lady of the 5 Territories, Keeper of the Flame. The last title was new, born from the night she'd summoned fire from her blood and brought a court to witness her brother's true nature. They didn't fully understand what she was, what power slumbered in her veins, but they respected it. They respected her. Zephyr waited at the dais, his crown gleaming in the morning light. When she reached him, he took her hands and raised them to his lips, pressing a kiss to each knuckle. My queen, he said, loud enough for the assembly to hear. My mate. My heart. My king, she answered, letting him settle the matching crown on her brow. My mate. My home. The court erupted in cheers. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, Zephyr's hand rested on her belly where their child, his child now, in every way that mattered, kicked against his palm. She's strong, he murmured, like her mother. Or he. Seren smiled, leaning back against his chest. We won't know for months yet. Either way. He pressed a kiss to the mark on her neck, and warmth flooded through the bond. Either way, they'll be loved. Protected. Ours. The fire crackled in the hearth, gentle now, contained, nothing like the flames that had taken her mother. But fire was hers to command now, fire and a mate, and a future she'd never dared imagine. I promised her, Seren said softly, my mother. I promised I'd bring the baby to you, that I'd claim the protection owed to our family. I never knew. That you'd find everything else? Zephyr's arms tightened around her. Neither did I. I'd stopped hoping years ago. And then you walked into my study with fire in your eyes and a seal in your hand, and my whole world changed." She turned in his embrace, tracing the mark she'd left on his neck. "No regrets?" "None." He captured her hand and pressed it over his heart. "Only gratitude, only love, only you, Seren, for the rest of our days." The baby kicked once more, as if in agreement. And in the great hall below, two crests hung side by side, the thorned crown of the Alpha King and the flame seal of the Valewood bloodline. Two houses united, two hearts made whole. One family, forged in fire and sealed in love, forever.